So up next, let's look at our first interval. Now, a lot of what we're going to be doing in this class is talking about intervals. And what an interval is a space between two notes. Okay? So, for example, I'm going to put a note here. We don't even care what note this is for now. Now I'm going to put a note here. This is the interval of a second. Okay? A second as in, not a second as in time, but a second as in the number 2. Because this note to this note, the interval is a second. It is the interval of a second because we can tell it's an interval of a second because if we count up notes, we go 1, 2, and these are side by side in the key, and that's when things get complicated, is when we start talking about in key. We're not going to talk about in key quite yet, but what I want you to know for right now is that we're going to focus on a single key, which is all of the white notes. So we're going to ignore the black notes for now. We're going to get to those shortly, but for now we're only looking at the white notes, okay? And if we look at just the white notes, here's 1 and here's 2. So this is the interval of a 2. This is the interval of a 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So we're going to go through a lot of different intervals because the intervals are what make up harmony, right? We stack a bunch of intervals together and we get a sound that we like. So the first interval I really want to talk about is the interval of an octave. And if you want to pick apart that word, octave, it means the same thing. The prefix of the word oct, O-C-T, means the same thing as it does in octopus or octagram or anything like that, which is something related to the number 8. Okay? 8. So it's going to be the interval of an 8. Okay? So if this is 1, this is 2. I'm only counting white notes, remember. This is 3. This is 4. This is 5, 6, 7, and 8. That is an octave. Okay? So why do we care about octaves? Here's why. You can see that Ableton here for me, and whatever DAW you're using, you've probably have this same thing happening because this is pretty standard. It's labeling all of the C's, so the pitch C. Okay, that's what I started on here. And Ableton's labeling these with the number, the letter and then the number, C2 and C3. The reason is we have 8 notes make an octave, and there are only 8 notes in a scale, okay? Which means in a key, there are only 8 notes. There are actually only 7 because the top and the bottom one are the same. So this note is a C, right? This note is also a C. So we call this one C2. 2 means what octave we're in, and the top one we call C3. That's a different octave, but the same pitch. So those are the different pitches we have, and every 8 notes in a key, they repeat. So by in a key, I mean, in our case, the white notes. The white notes are what's locking us into a key for right now. If we don't want to talk about just the white notes, it's every 12. 1, including black notes, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then it repeats. So there are 12 possible notes, and if we count up the letter names for each of these, so we call each note a letter. Every note gets a letter. So C, D, E, F, G. G is our highest one, and then it starts over. A, B, and then we get C again. So why do we care? Why not just count up forever, right? Why do we repeat this? Well, these 2 notes, this octave, have a lot of really powerful similarities to them, those 2 notes. Let me play them for you here. I'm just going to throw... let me throw just a piano sound on here. Just a simple piano so we can hear these. Okay. So here are the two notes side by side. Right? That's an octave. That's the interval of an octave. Let's hear them at the same time. That's them at the same time. So I'm playing two notes that are an octave apart. Now, to explain why they sound good together, since this is an electronic music class, let's talk a tiny bit about synthesis. Well, not synthesis per se, but let's talk about waveforms. When we look at the waveform of the lower octave, in this case C2, it looks something like this. And then an octave higher than that looks something like this. Now, the reason these are octaves is because the wavelength of the higher octave is exactly twice the wavelength of the lower octave. So it's going to fit perfectly inside the lower octave. The higher octave, 2 cycles of the higher octave is going to make 1 cycle of the lower octave. It's a perfect 1-to-2 ratio. And those perfect ratios always sound good, right? So whenever you're working on a track and you've got some melody, let me just do this. Let's say we've got some melody, and I'm just going to like randomly hit white notes. And it's going to sound pretty good. Oops, that's not a white note. There we go. Let's do that. Just extend that one out. Okay, so here's my just random melody of white notes. Okay, cool. Now, if I want to jazz that up a little bit, I'm going to select all of it, and I'm going to add an octave by just copying this. Okay, so now this note is an octave higher at the same time. This note is an octave higher. So I've added an octave of everything, and this is going to sound great because when you add an octave to something, it's a really safe harmony to add because you can kind of blindly do it. Just add an octave, and it's going to sound good. It'll sound a little, it's hard to put word on these things, but let's say a little stronger, right? Here it is. Okay, here it is without the octave. And with the octave. Right, so the octave makes a great sound if you want that little bit thicker. If we want to do something a little different but still want it thicker, let's add a lower octave. So what we did here is we added a higher octave. Let's add a lower one. Okay, so now I've got my original melody here and my lower octave down here. Let's hear that. Right, so it's still the same notes. I haven't changed any notes. I've just added an octave. And you can always find an octave by counting up 8 notes of the key, which remember in our case, that means all white notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is our octave. So that's why octaves sound good. That's what they are. When in doubt, add an octave and you'll have a great time. Okay, so let's do one other thing here. Let me show you some cool things you can do with octaves where I'm just going to jam for a second with some octaves and show you I'm just going to put something together using pretty much just octaves to show you how these can be useful to you in the next video.